Welcome and good evening. Next to me is my colleague Paz Guevara. My name is Anselm Franke. Together we organized this conference that we are inaugurating right now. This is a double event. Tonight is above all the opening of the exhibition Past is Quiet, and that will be the main topic of tonight's talks. But we're also inaugurating a long-term project called Canon Fragen. And I'm restricting my introductory notes only to a few comments. I'll do another introduction tomorrow at 12 o'clock with a couple of notes on what this project will become. In my introduction right now, I wanted to briefly discuss, if not in depth, then merely with a couple of hints, really two works of art that may circumscribe and just make present to all of us what this may be about. Walid Raad, an artist that is neither in the exhibition nor in the conference, but that both Rasha, Salti and Kristine Khouri and myself share a certain history with and are inspired, continually inspired by. Last year published a letter after he was denied entry into upon traveling to the Abu Dhabi branch of the Guggenheim to the Guggenheim Museum and those in charge, that I want to read a very brief excerpt of. A couple of weeks ago, the Guggenheim stated that its Abu Dhabi branch is an opportunity for a dynamic cultural exchange and to chart a more inclusive and expansive view of art history. I agree. But I've wondered for some time now whether travel bans and deportations will be the fate of artists, writers, and others who actually engage in this dynamic cultural exchange. Now that I know, I wonder how the Guggenheim will be able to be inclusive and expansive when the very artists who are meant to be included in the expansive view of art history are systematically excluded, banned, and deported. In the rest of the letter, he describes the many projects of the Guggenheim that he was part of, and also outlines his involvement in the group, the Gulf labor activists who are contesting the practices of exploitation on the sites of construction of these major new museums that currently produce a large shift in the kind of topography of art history and valorization of the canon in the Arab world and beyond. And I thought the question of what expansion and exclusion, which is pertinent to the Haus der Kulturen der Welt and its mission, means today, and what are the conditions and how are we to talk about them, makes this excerpt of that letter a good introductory note. I'm showing an image of Walid's exhibition here in the back, scratching on things that I could disavow. It's just one image out of a very complex project in which he kind of historicizes his own already complex historicizing work, in which the deconstruction, reconstruction, fictionalization, and grounding of the canon is at stake. I've chosen to start with Walid not only because of the excerpt, the problematics that he articulates so clearly and beautifully in this letter, but also because in this particular exhibition, the first part of it, Walid Raad addresses, the first part of it is a kind of detective story, really. A wall in front of which he performs and narrates a detective story that I think addresses other issues that are important to to consider in what canon questions are today. This is a story of a pension trust set up for artists by an investor who also runs an art website. And the context, I have to be brief on this, it's a long story, is really how art is increasingly subject to financialization, to investment politics, to algorithmization, and the canon itself is largely done by this kind of strange connection between databases and speculations. Right? In a second part, in the fourth part of scratching of the work, scratching of things I could disavow, Walid creates a kind of typical for him scenario of a haunting that comes not from the past but from the future. And I think that's an important motive again for how one can challenge one's own thinking about what it means to talk about constructions of history, that they're actually about constructing imaginaries and futures. And this is what you see in the back here. In the front you see a model in which he kind of miniaturizes, presents the history of this project that he was developing for a long time, for more than a decade. The Atlas Group in the background, you see a work called Index 16, Primary Colors, that is a kind of work on how that in a strange way colors themselves are affected by the destruction of history, in a sense where Walid presents a story of being telepathically in touch with artists, dealing with the question of in telepathy, what is signal and what is noise, and these artists kind of coming from the future in a projected time where the primary colors, and I think that's a metaphor also for, the foundations of what is the material of an artist. The primary colors themselves are endangered because in this future they no longer have these colors, so they come and steal them from the past. The kind of Chris Marker-like narration. And this haunting from the future, of course, is leading us into this entire realm of what stability and instability in canon constructions and canon narratives might mean for us today. The second work I wanted to briefly introduce is the work that we used in the flyer that you probably all saw, and the motive that we used for the conference, A History of Limits, and that brings us right to Berlin and to the context of discussing canon questions and constructions of history in the Federal Republic of Germany at this very moment. This is Dirk Schmidt, a painter whose work is largely engaging with the question of what history painting can be, is today. And this new series, you see an older piece of him in the Nervous System exhibitions. I hope you will all find the time to see that. This new piece of Dirk is actually on view right now at the KOW gallery. And it engages with the kind of construction of history as it happens in the museum island and in the surrounding and the very site of the former Prussian castle in the center of Berlin, where in a strange way antiquity and the Prussian state are short-circuited. So this is a work that engages with what are these vitrines that conserve and stage history here in the new museum on the museum island. Everybody will recognize the head of the on in the painting on the left side, and the way the past, in the words of Alexander Koch, becomes a kind of political artifact, short-circuiting and omitting certain things while highlighting other continuities, questioning these continuities for their neocolonial bearings. The exhibition that we are opening today, Past Disquiet, was developed by Rasha, Salti and Kristine Khouri and first shown last year at the MACBA. The idea to bring this exhibition in an extended version to Berlin emerged in the context of our planning of this Canon Fragen project for the next 3 years. And we want to reflect with this project, with the Canon Fragen project, on the changing status of art and what the HKW is as an art institution, what the framing conditions of HKW are in terms of situating ourselves in complex, entangled histories and art histories, in a time where we are dealing with this constellation that Walid delineated in his letter, of a paradigm of inclusion and expansion, where internally the art system seems to be delimited and all-inclusive, and externally globalized, and the mechanisms of exclusion become increasingly difficult to make explicit and delineate. The question of the canon is obviously always what history and for whom, and the kind of cultural semiotics and literacy that this produces and what it excludes. And for art history, the question of how art history as a discipline relates to other disciplines, to geopolitics, social history, etc. This is a long list, of course, and I'm going to mention some of this tomorrow, introducing the question of architectures of narratives. Art history as a discipline, I guess, still has trouble coming to terms with its own relation to these other histories and the geopolitical shifts we're currently experiencing. And the contested question of segregated cultural memories and claims to a global art history and what that means in terms of universalist conceptions and how to ground them to concrete realities and solidarities. The case of the Palestine Solidarity exhibition in 1978 in Beirut is significant in this context because the struggles and historical narratives that it articulates are deeply implicating the present and are at the same time obscured. Not least because what we are dealing with here forces us to think not only about canon construction in an embattled terrain, but also about canon destruction. And because we are dealing here with a history of disappointments also, the structures and trench lines of these implications are increasingly reifying, sort of subterranean, if you will, and eventually return in displaced form to the stage of global politics, now increasingly deprived of common horizons and finding itself caught in irreconcilable identitarian schemes and partisan histories. For a critical, globalized, in quotation marks, canon, this is a crucial question. What images were actually produced and made available in the context of Palestine in the last decades? And what was their fate? In short, for the Haus der Kulturen der Welt today, we cannot be content with continuing to deal with a kind of normative notion of culture, in quotation marks. But we have to confront the structural conditions and frames that far exceed the classical terrain of critical art discourse. This question of solidarity we began to address in an exhibition 2 years ago called After Year Zero that engaged with the Bandung Conference and non-aligned movement with the Pan-African movement and just sketched out things that I think are far more elaborated and connect really well to the work that Rasha and Kristine have done with past disquiets. The question of a museum in exile, I think, introduces and makes very concrete some of the questions that tomorrow we will deal with in occasionally more abstract terms of what groundlessness means. Here, groundlessness means not being naturalized on nationalized territory. And with this, I will actually hand over to Paz Guevara, who will introduce our speakers tonight.
Good evening. I'm glad to introduce you further into the questions of the first panel of the conference. We open with a panel entitled The Museum in Exile, posing the question, how does the condition of exile change the conception of the museum when the museum is dislocated, and what its canon might be? This interrogation emerges from the transnational network that the research and exhibition Past Disquiet by Kristine Khouri and Rasha Salti share with us. The speakers of this panel will invite us to join them first with the case of the 1978 International Art Exhibition in solidarity with Palestine that was meant to lay the foundations of a museum in exile for the Palestinian people from Beirut on, a talk that Kristine Khouri and Rasha Salti will give entitled Occultal Cartographies, Tracing Networks Concealed in Lists of Artists and Speculative Exhibition Histories. Kristine Khouri and Rasha Salti are independent writers, researchers, and curators based in Beirut, also detectives, as you will hear. They are the curators of the exhibition that opened tonight, Past Disquiet. Among other projects, Kristine Khouri has curated the founding years, 1969-1973, a selection of works from the Sultan Gallery archives in 2012 at the Sultan Gallery in Kuwait, and Rasha Salti, among others, has been co-curator of the 10th Sharjah Biennial in 2011. Together, Khouri and Salti are the founders of the History of Arab Modernities in the Visual Art Study Group, a research platform dedicated to the social history of art in the Arab world. The conference will continue with the talk, A New Cultural Model of Solidarity by Claudia Zaldívar, current director of the Museo de la Solidaridad Salvador Allende in Santiago in Chile. She will invite us to the foundation, history, and rereadings of this museum founded in 1972 in Santiago de Chile as an alternative museology based on the principle of solidarity. This matrix, this principle, was achieved by the donation of artworks within an extensive network of artists and intellectuals in order to build a collection, and also in regards of its political purpose to bring the arts to the people and overcome the elitist character of cultural institutions at that time. Shortly after its opening, this museum was closed due to the military coup in 1973. Nevertheless, the solidarity networks continued to be active, and the museum managed to operate in exile. In fact, this model became the model of the anti-imperialist solidarity movement of the 70s that inspired the 1978 International Art Exhibition for Palestine. Before directing the museum, Claudia Zaldívar also directing a public space, La Galería Gabriela Mistral, is an art historian, and at the end of the dictatorship, she made the first thesis on the topic of the Museo de la Solidaridad. I invite you to help me to welcome these two speakers and the first panel.
Thank you, everybody, for staying. Thank you for this lovely introduction. Her name is Paz Guevara, which is already an awesome name. But I can assure you she's a woman who does not take no for an answer, and it's part of the reason our exhibition looks much more fabulous than it was supposed to, because she got us incredible archives. Thank you, Paz. And thank you, Anselm. Actually, Walid Rad is, if there are arranged marriages, and let's not talk about the genders here, but if there are arranged couples, Walid Rad is the matchmaker between us. So, and we started, the study group was not really his idea, but he has a way of influencing. And that's how Kristine and I met. He told me I should meet this incredible person, and we decided. I think it was love at first sight, and we decided.
The journey began.
Yeah. Okay. The International Art Exhibition for Palestine was organized by the Palestine Liberation Organization's Plastic Art Section of the Unified Information Office. It was made possible because of the passionate commitment of a number of PLO representatives in several countries, as well as solidarity networks between artists and activists around the world who supported the Palestinian Revolution. The exhibition presented the seed collection for a future museum in solidarity with Palestine in exile, destined to be itinerant and travel until it could return to a free and democratic Palestine, with approximately 200 works by 200 artists from 30 countries. In 1982, the Israeli army advanced on Beirut and held the city under military siege with the objective of forcing the PLO to leave. The building where the collection was stored was shelled, along with the offices of where the Unified Information and the exhibition's works and paper trail were stored. All that remained of the exhibition story were the memories of those who made it happen and those who visited it.
The catalog remains the most tangible and comprehensive trace for imagining this exhibition. We conducted interviews with people in Beirut, Amman, and Damascus, and slowly began to piece together the large puzzle. We were furthermore intrigued after we realized that in spite of its scale and scope, the exhibition seemed to have all but disappeared from narratives of art history in both local and regional versions. The progress of our research was dramatically changed when we met Claude Zaldívar, a French artist living in Paris who had been intimately involved with the Jeune Peinture and was very close to Ezzedine Khalek, the PLO representative in Paris from 1972 until 1978. As well as with Palestinian militants in Paris during the 1970s. There's Claude up there on the left. Zaldívar, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and he's with us today, but we'll invite him later.
Yes. Zaldívar was a key protagonist in conceptualizing the exhibition as a museum in exile and had mobilized a large number of artists to donate work. In June 2011, we rang the bell of his studio, and he pulled out 3 boxes from his personal archives, one containing photographs, one with newspapers and magazine clippings, and one with facsimiles and papers. He welcomed us enthusiastically, saying, "I've been waiting for you for 30 years." Yes, my voice, it happens. This investigation began with the photocopy of a catalog. A significant part of our research was dedicated to discovering and/or uncovering how some of the artists, agents, associations, and galleries may have been connected. Soon after we started our exploration, we came to understand the central role of Ezzedine Khalek, featured right there, in playing in the conceptual and realization of this exhibition as a museum in exile. He was assassinated in Paris several months after the exhibition opened in Beirut. The genesis of the International Art Exhibition for Palestine has various roots. On one hand, the PLO established the plastic art section to organize various kinds of exhibitions, as well as to promote the work of Palestinian and other artists producing work in support of the cause. In 1965, the PLO had established the Department of Arts and National Culture, also a film unit and a publishing house. The production of posters was deemed paramount. On the other hand, PLO representatives in a number of countries were actively engaged in mobilizing the support of militant artists and intellectuals. To some, Palestine became a metaphor for the injustice and despotism and imperialism. To others, the Palestinian struggle for self-determination echoed the struggle against the U.S. invasion of Vietnam, the Pinochet dictatorship in Chile, and the apartheid regime in South Africa. A number of the artists in the exhibition had been actively engaged with these struggles and causes through collective work. They produced posters, lithographs, staged exhibitions, events in public spaces, and participated in mass protests. Some artists had also been involved in establishing similar large itinerant exhibitions presented as museums in exile to incarnate support for a political cause. Mm-hmm. Sorry, one moment. Yeah. So in fact, one version of the Sorry, let's see if this is working. Up. Okay. In fact, one version of the genesis of the International Art Exhibition for Palestine links directly to the Museo Internacional de la Resistencia Salvador Allende, or the International Resistance Museum for Salvador Allende, established in Paris shortly after the Pinochet coup by a group of international art critics, artists, and intellectuals. A number of these artists were also involved in establishing the Artists of the World Against Apartheid Committee, an exhibition which toured the world as a museum in exile. Both exhibitions and collections have repatriated to Chile and South Africa, respectively, and embody exceptional worldly legacies of political and human rights engagement in the history of art and museums, which we'll speak a bit more about later.
So the video that you're watching now is a video we decided to film shortly before we completed the conception of the exhibition at the Makba. At some point, we felt that it was really important to be very transparent about our methodology, because we were like detectives. This is a history that's happened very recently. The 1970s are not so long ago. But because of the way history is produced, knowledge is produced about art today, it has become almost an unimaginable or an inaccessible history. So we took that page from the catalog where people are acknowledged. There are names of people, there are institutions, and after talking and interviewing some other people, we had some other names, and we kept drawing those connections. This process that you see filmed is something that we often did, maybe once every few months, just to make sure that we had the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. We realized, one of the big questions was, when we were looking at the list of artists who donated work, the question is why these artists and not others? But maybe the more important question was, what linked these artists? What was behind the list of names? Of course, after talking to Claude, we understood, for example, that the Jeune Peinture, a large number of the French artists listed in the catalogue were part of the Jeune Peinture. And then this is basically the process that led us. We tried to find the connections between artists, and we tried to find the links between the artists and the PLO. If there was a PLO representative that contacted them, if they had Palestinian friends, if Palestinian artists knew them or had any contact with them. So among the most important is the story of the Salon of the Jeune Peinture. I will just read you a small paragraph, and then we are really lucky to have Claude and Margot with us today. They have been just incredible support. They feel almost like family now. Since its establishment in Paris in 1950, the Salon de la Jeune Peinture has been a singular event, created by artists for artists, entirely free from the direct and indirect intervention of galleries and the market. The Jeune Peinture's organizational structure includes a general assembly that elects a committee to oversee its salon every year. The committee is in turn mandated to select works. On occasion, a theme is assigned to the salon. In 1968, the Jeune Peinture became more overtly militant, and the committee decided, for example, to dedicate the salon to the victory of the Vietnamese people with the Salle Rouge pour le Vietnam. In 69 and 70, the salon's theme was police and culture, 1 and 2. And hosted a multitude of artist collectives. Celebrating collective painting and direct interventions, the Salon of 71 and 72 were dedicated to the popular struggles prevailing in France. By 72, the Salon had become an eminently political platform and host to a range of artist collectives engaged in work around local and international issues. Claude Lazare was president of the Jeune Peinture briefly. He and a group of artists have gotten together and decided to write a book about the Jeune Peinture. We are very lucky to have him. We will invite him on stage. He will say a few words about the Jeune Peinture and about the forthcoming book. Please join us in welcoming him.
Hello, starting with a few words about my experience. I start being a militant in art around 68 during this movement, intellectual movement and the student movement in Paris. And I start with posters. Posters was very famous at that time. And after 68, I continue painting. But I was isolated in my studio, and I thought that cinema was more efficient to be a militant with art. And so I joined friends in Vincennes, that was an important university for the revolution thinking. And I joined a comedian and a cineast, a filmmaker. But after a while, I was discussing of a relation. There was a continual relation of industry. So I went away and I found a group of artists, Front des Artistes Plasticiens, that was very close with me. Engaged with different solidarity like Chile, like Vietnam, and other movement was doing for the artists about social security, about condition of the artists in the market, not being exploited by the galleries. But after a while, the ego of the artist explodes. So I joined another group, was very important. It was the Salon de la Jeune Peinture. It was more with painters. Salon Jeune Peinture was a group of artists was showing every year paintings and having ideas how to transform the relation of the artist. And I said that because as we are talking about Palestine and Chile Museum, it's not something of the past. It's, for me, something that continues to live. And what I have remembers of those movement is something very bad. The critics are changing the history. The artists are talking now of this period changing so many things. So I phoned 3 years ago after meeting Rasha and Kristine. I said, guys, contacting artists of that period, guys, what we have done is, I think, is important to talk about as we have lived it, not like leave the others talk about that. So we have a reunion after reunion, and we decided to do a book about Jeune Peinture, the movement where we was engaged in. And each one was bringing his own witnesses about what he did in this group, because he was working in collective of artists, talking, deciding. And for 3 years, and we have worked a lot on this book. And this book, by chance, is not by chance. It's a pity it's not ready now. It has to be printed in few days coming. But perhaps before the end of the show, you can find some exemplar here. So that I want to say, the past is not a ghost. The past continue now and in the future. Thank you.
So another another group of another collective, and this is how we came to research Italy. Claude started in the Jeune Peinture something called Collectif Palestine. So it was a collective of artists who were dedicated to doing work on Palestine. And the Collectif Palestine produced a long mural that was 6 meters long and 2 meters tall, and that was used by the PLO and various activists during conferences and events. And it's the sort of things that artists did. They painted banners and murals and for protests, for all kinds of issues and political events. And they came into contact with a collective in Italy called Arcicoda. Arcicoda was a collective of Italian artists in Tuscany who were very political as well. And among the things they did serigraphic prints, they produced events in public spaces around the causes that they supported, like Chile, like the war, like the struggle against the Pinochet dictatorship, the struggle, the opposition to the war in Vietnam. The Collectif Palestine, the Arcicoda hosted the Collectif Palestine in Tuscany, and in 1976, there was a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon called Tel Zatar that was under siege by Lebanese right-wing militias and at the time supported by the Syrian army. The camp was under siege, it was being bombarded, it was in the news, and the Collectif Palestine and the Arcicoda decide for awareness raising to stage events in public squares. The photo shows a stencil portrait of the crushed face of a boy that they painted either on a canvas or immediately on the stone. These are documents. The poster in the middle calls for attending this event. This is another view. They did this intervention in several small towns in Tuscany and in Mestre in 1976 during the Venice Biennale. They were invited by the Venice Biennale to do it. This is another photo. And then here you see Claude making a speech. And next to him with the curly hair is an Algerian artist, Rachid Qureshi, and two Italians.
A little detail I want to say about that. The community of Mestre have said, we don't want you paint on the street because it's very old stone, so we put a big banner, and we had to paint just on the banner when you see the Arab words on. And at the beginning, we was painting on the banner. But people around was taking the stencil, taking painting, and start continuing to do on the stones. And the police, nobody want to interrupt, and we cover all the place like that. For that, you have all the place covered.
So yes, at the end of when the canvas was fully covered, Rachid Qureshi would write Tel Zatar in Arabic on the stones. I have to say that for the Mestre also the unions, les syndicats étaient impliqués, the unions of workers were involved, various political groups were involved.
So our time is very limited tonight, and the exhibition allows you the time and space to kind of look through the other collectives and groups of artists that we have been researching, but we just want to highlight a few of them this evening and continue and tell you about these, again, the museums in exile, a little bit more detail about the Nicaragua and South African situations. So in 1980, during a festival in Rome that celebrated the first anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution, Ernesto Cardenal, a renowned poet and minister of culture in the new Sandinista government, met with Carmen Waugh, a Chilean gallerist and cultural manager who played a major role in the International Resistance Museum for Salvador Allende. It was there that the idea for a museum in solidarity with the Nicaraguan people was born. Waugh spearheaded the project, and a year later, an exhibition in support of the Nicaraguan people was inaugurated in Madrid and then in Paris. The invitation was to Latin American artists, mostly of whom were exiled in Europe, and Spanish artists as well. Many of them, again, were the same names that came up that donated work to the Palestinian exhibition as well as to the Chilean initiative. And this is, again, where these projects, these museums in exile, tie together beyond just their structure, but the artists actually involved in making it possible and in donating work. The collection of nearly 300 works was sent to Managua in 1983, and it grew over the years. It operated as the Museo de Arte Latinoamericano Contemporáneo de Managua, and in 1985 it was renamed the Museo Julio Cortázar in honor of the writer. It was later operated by an association of artists from 1988 till 1994, and then after that, things get complicated. The collection was claimed to be expropriated. It was dispersed. Some claim that many of the works were sold on the black market. Others were taken back by embassies for safekeeping. For the last few years, there have been claims that the Nicaraguan Cultural Institute will reopen the museum, and we hope that will happen.
So we will end with a happy note, because we gotta. Oh, no, sorry.
Just leave it.
Leave it, okay. So a video will play soon, shortly. So we had when this notion of a museum in exile emerged, we learned that the Chileans did it and the Palestinians borrowed it from the Chileans. And then we realized that actually it happened also for the Sandinista revolution. We also learned that another exhibition was set up, run by artists, based on works donated by artists, and was itinerant for more than 10 years, administered by two artists, Ernest Piño-Ernest, Antonio Saura. Antonio Saura is a painter, Spanish painter. Ernest Piño-Ernest is a French artist. Basically, they both used the idea and very much the network of the radical left and inspired from the Chileans to build a collection to show the opposition, the support of artists against the apartheid regime in South Africa. And the exhibition, the first time, was shown at the UN in 1979. I think the UN had declared that year the year of the struggle against apartheid. The exhibition toured the world. And when Nelson Mandela was released in '92, and then the apartheid regime fell, after there were elections, the first free parliamentary elections in South Africa, and the parliament was supposed to convene, Ernest Piño and Antonio Saura were in contact with the ANC cultural department, and the ANC decided that for that first session of parliament, the apartheid art that was in the building of the parliament had to be removed permanently, I hope. And it was replaced with this collection. The collection was displayed there for the first time, and then it was given to the custody of a center called the Maibuye Center, which in Xhosa language means return home. And the Maibuye Center is an archive of the anti-apartheid struggle. It's an audio, print archive. It's fantastic. It's a small group of people, very dedicated, at the University of Western Cape. When we were in Cape Town, a photographer called Eric Miller documented the removal of the apartheid art and the hanging of the collection of the artists of the world against apartheid. And we basically, from the photos, we basically made this video, this scrolling slideshow. Here you see that they placed, at some point, they placed the artworks in the seats of where the parliamentarians were supposed to meet. And on a happier note, so it's always important, very important for us to end with this, because we are both curators, researchers, but when we're dealing with history that the traces of which are either elusive or no longer as available, when you have to rely on people giving you testimonies, sharing their stories with you, opening their drawers, their boxes, sharing their images, their photographs, people like Claude, hundreds of people, we feel that we are totally indebted to them, that we write with them, that we owe them a debt of gratitude, and that they have a claim of authorship as much as we do in this production of history. You hear our voices in the exhibition because we claim authorship, but we are proposing a speculative version of a very complicated history, sometimes a wounded history. But we hope that it opens the field of possibilities for not only questioning the canon, but hopefully destroying the canon. Thank you.
Buenas noches. Rasha y Kristine, debo decir que estoy muy emocionada.
Let me tell you first of all that I'm moved.
Porque es primera vez como internacionalmente,
because this is the first time that on an international stage I can tell you more about the International Resistance Museum for Salvador Allende. It's a museum which is based on the donations of artists of the time, and we have tried to establish and re-establish this network of collaboration of artists and curators all over the world, and it's extremely interesting to look at what we do and carry out our research and investigations together. Having said this, we are talking about canons, we are talking about Latin America, and I will talk about Chile, which is, so to speak, an island in Latin America. The Museo de la Solidaridad was founded in the 1970s. It was established by a government. It was part of a utopia, which was then destroyed by a dictatorship and the politics carried out by Washington. I would like to thank the institution for having invited me and for offering me the platform so that I can tell you more about the MSSA. We need to see that there are three levels, so to speak: arts, politics, and solidarity. This goes for the museum you have just heard about, but also for the Museo de la Solidaridad in Chile. We have to see that the MSSA was part of a particular political and historical context, which was, so to speak, the founding elements with respect to its overall approach. The idea was to establish a political museum in the broadest sense of the word. It was also meant to show a rather complex path with respect to intellectual relations, political and artistic relations. The concept as such was based on an act of solidarity, and it was a completely new approach carried out by the most important artists of the time. It referred to Chile and to the fact that in November 1970, Salvador Allende, the candidate of the Unidad Popular, had become the president of the country. He was the first ever socialist elected to this position. Thus, what happened in Chile was rather different from what happened in other Latin American countries, where a number of military dictatorships originated, right-wing political movements, or where there was the left-wing political experience of Cuba. And all this happened in a world which was divided into two political blocs, led by the United States on the one hand and the Soviet Union on the other hand. The Cuban Revolution in Latin America of 1959 had marked a change on the map of international relations. In Chile, it was a democratic process in which the president was elected, a socialist president, and yet he was elected. So with the government of Salvador Allende, there was a new focus for the left in Latin America, which again was divided into two political blocs. There was one axis, the Havana-Lima axis, where you had a number of countries in the Andes region, including Chile, and on the other hand, the Washington-Brasilia axis, where you found, among others, the Brazilian dictatorships and also the right-wing governments of Bolivia, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Now, there was the new Chilean way towards socialism as a new trend in this prism. And this is the background we have to bear in mind when looking at the museum, which came into being because of the support and solidarity of a number of artists and intellectuals in the world. There are also a number of events which need to be mentioned in the time in which the museum was established. For example, in March 1971, when Operación Verdad took place, Operation Truth, which was a meeting of intellectuals and journalists and artists invited to Chile by President Allende so that they would see immediately and directly, without any other intervention, the transformation undertaken by the government. In this context, the art critic, José María Moreno Galván, and the Italian senator and writer Carlo Levi suggested the idea of collecting works of art donated by European art circles in order to establish a museum for the people of Chile. This was meant to be an act of solidarity of the artists who supported the Unidad Popular. The next step was then the establishment of an executive committee and the nomination or appointment of the president of this committee, Mario Pedrosa, a Brazilian art critic and the organizer of the biennials of Sao Paulo in 1953 and 1961. This is Mario Pedrosa, and in addition to these gentlemen I just mentioned, there were a number of others who helped with the establishment of the museum, and the CISAC, an association, an international committee of solidarity of artists with Chile. Members were, for example, Carlo Levi and José María Moreno Galván, Rafael Valberti, Louis Aragon, Doré Ashton, Jean Lemarie, Giulio Carlo Argan, Edward de Wilde, Ronald Penrose, Harald Seemann, the then artistic director of Documenta 5. Aldo Pellegrini and Mariano Rodriguez. The idea was thus to establish a museum, and Mario Pedrosa wrote that it was important to have a number of participants to set up a museum on the basis of international solidarity, and Pedrosa describes in detail the processes I've just mentioned, so the setting up of the executive committee, the CSAC, and the general approach with respect to art and the curatorship. A number of artists were invited to participate. Also, in order to make sure that different trends and approaches and ideas would be represented. I haven't brought any artists here in person, but I've brought you a video so that you hear from first hand what it was like in the time. Dora Ashton.
Well, it was when I was asked to become a member of the committee for this museum. I, of course, live in New York City and was designated the United States representative of the International Committee. And I immediately got in touch with those artists that I felt were really significant and would bring prestige to your museum here. And as I wrote to Mario, they weren't always that enthusiastic to give something away, a good one, and I wouldn't accept minor things. I always made sure I saw what it was. So much of what's here today in this Museo de Solidaridad that I sent was of high quality. I was careful about that. The International Committee, which was very distinguished, Mario chose very well. And as you know, Mario Pedrosa was highly regarded by everyone for many reasons. So the International Committee were all major figures, like the director of the Museum of Modern Art in Paris and so on. And I was the North American representative. My personal interests would, of course, have guided my requests, but I also bore in mind that this was, as Mario made very clear, it was to be non-sectarian, that my personal prejudices mustn't enter. And I tried very hard to do that. On the other hand, the artists that we regarded in the United States as major artists were almost all abstract artists. So I did choose abstract artists that you have hanging here today. I'd say on the whole, most of the painters and sculptors that I knew very little about Allende and the revolution. And they weren't that enthusiastic about donating, giving free a work of art to a museum in Chile. So I confess, I put pressure on them. As I said, I twisted their arm. And it was a little hard for them to say no to me because I was, at the time, a quite well-known so-called art critic. And it wasn't good to make me an enemy. So it was a very delicate project. Oh, for me, it was a great accomplishment that I was very grateful to Mario Pedrosa for including me and for being part of the first ever museum of abstract art, or art that was difficult for El Pueblo, that he would, as Mario Pedrosa always said, and he proved it, I think, from what I read, that I believe the first exhibition of the works that we gathered for this museum was for the copper miners in the north. And in my experience since then, too, if you approach working class people who know nothing about abstract art and so on, in the right way, it's nothing difficult. They accept it. But usually it's not approached, certainly not in my country, that way. Most of the artists that I sent were in sympathy with the idea of a free museum for everyone, which would show what we call progressive art. In other words, art that most of the working class would find difficult. But if you present it, if you respect, our view was, if you're very respectful to the workers and make them welcome and don't charge them a fee to come in, they usually are quite cooperative. They want to learn. That was my experience, and that, I was told, was true here, right? What is my impression about the Museo de Solidaridad? Now, looking back, well, it's still the only, unfortunately, it's still the only example of a museum which is made by and for the people, and amongst whom I include artists. And so, in a way, it's unique, which is good for you, but not good for the world, because we meant it to be a prototype, and that they would be all over the world. There would be Museo de Solidaridad, and that the artists would no longer be a captive of the capitalist system and of those merchants, the art dealers, and of the wealthy people that bought them. And in my experience anyway, most painters and sculptors, and also people who do larger things like Alfredo Har, do not want to be captive to the capitalist system. They really are not that happy to be hanging in very rich men's houses, and they would rather be in a museum like this, which is for everyone. But as far as I know, this is still unique, right?
Bueno, parte de la conferencia fue Dor, que está ya más viejita, ya perdió la cabeza.
Now, this was recorded some time ago. She's quite old. She's even older now, but it's an interesting description of what happened. It is, in fact, difficult to get these testimonials because many of those who supported the establishment of the museum are very old today or have died already. And 4 years ago, we tried to collect a number of testimonials for a conference. Now, the International Committee wanted to see the museum as a new cultural model, something to overcome the traditional concept of a museum. And in a declaration, they said, the members of the International Committee said, the museum should belong to the state, to the government, but yet it should be autonomous. It would be an inseparable whole thing and a permanent space of exhibitions. Thus, the approach was again a bit different from the Nicaraguan approach. The idea was also to not only establish an artistic institution, but something which would be based on a political, ideological idea or ideal, something which would try and find new cultural models, a living museum, a dynamic institution, something to serve the people of Chile. And under these precepts, the Museum of Solidarity wanted to be the most important museum of modern and experimental art in Latin America, representing a particular historical phase and something to live on into the future, growing on the basis of new donations. And it wanted to dedicate its activities to two sides, modern art and Latin American art. There were a number of countries, so to speak, involved in the museum: Argentina, Brazil, Cuba, Spain, the United States, France, Holland, England, Italy, Poland, Switzerland, and Uruguay. And of course, the question is what happened to the works which were to be donated or which were to be shown in the museum during the coup d'etat. Now, a number of works were caught at the customs stations, for example. Others stayed in the embassies, were then taken up by museums of art in the countries themselves, and then eventually given to the Museo de la Solidaridad, which was to be reestablished after the end of the coup d'etat or the dictatorship. So, back to the roots, so to speak. In the beginning, Pedrosa and the members of the CISAC made a call so that works of art would be sent to Chile, and these works arrived. And in April 1972, the first pieces were there, coming from France, Spain, and Mexico, for example, including, for example, a work by Jean Miro, who had painted for the Chilean government a major oil painting showing the rooster of victory. We also have a work by Sol Levitt, or Alexander Calder, Torres Garcia, Roberto Mata, and others. Today, the Museo de la Solidaridad initially, the Museo de la Solidaridad had about 650 works of very different types and genres, and, as I said, artists. Also more experimental art works, like, for example, by Lydia Clark or Antonio Diaz or Arnulf Reina. 650 works in 1972, representing a major diversity coming from the countries I mentioned. And at the opening, Mario Pedrosa spoke, and this was a great honor, of course, President Allende too. And I would like to quote him here in front of this audience also to honor him. He said, "The artists of the world have known how to interpret this profound sense of style of Chile in a combat for national liberation." And this is a gesture, a unique gesture in a cultural trajectory, a decided, a spontaneous, and important one. Pedrosa established a committee, and in October, le sugieren invitar a Seaman, que estaba siendo el curador de 72, invited also Harald Seaman, the then curator of Documenta 5. Seaman accepted the invitation and also with the full weight of his position as the curator of the Documenta, invited more artists to donate works. But then the coup d'etat happened. Of course, we do have a number of letters in the archives of the museum, invitations to artists, answers of artists, and we know that lots of works were sent, and not all reached the country on time before the military coup. Because as you know, the military coup happened on 11th September 1973. Members of the committee tried, of course, to rescue as much as possible of the works. Some works stayed in the countries before they were sent to Chile. Others were kept by members of the committee and others in their houses in order to protect them from the seizure of the dictatorship. It took some time before it was possible to get all these works back and incorporate them into the inventory of the museum. This also happened to a number of the works Harald Seemann had solicited. There were, for example, 6 works which were to be sent to Chile, which have disappeared. Of course, we are studying what happened to these works, but we are also studying what happened to the part of the museum which was focusing on resistance, i.e. to what happened after the coup d'etat and was meant as acts of solidarity and resistance. Now, after the coup d'etat, some of the founding members of the museum went to Europe, many of them to Paris. The president of the committee himself went to Mexico, Pedrosa, that is. And in the course of the events, the works which had been in the country already were seized by the dictatorship. The idea was, however, to protect and safeguard all these works in order to then eventually set up the museum once Chile would be democratized again. In the years of the dictatorship, in exile, of course, the idea of the museum remained a living one. And at the end of the year 1975, the museum was, so to speak, re-established under the name of International Resistance Museum for Salvador Allende, Museo Internacional de la Resistencia Salvador Allende. Furthermore, it was the idea of solidarity which was to be used in order to continue working on a museum of solidarity in Paris in particular, for example, where a new general secretariat was established, because many of the founders of the museum had gone to Paris, as I said, Pedrosa, Balmes, Rojas, Mieras, and others. And there was also an executive coordinator appointed, Miria Contreras, in Cuba, at the Casa de las Americas in Havana. And a number of solidarity or supporting committees were established in a number of countries, including Colombia, Cuba, United States, Spain, France, Italy, Mexico, Panama, Switzerland, and Venezuela. It was political and intellectual support, and more works were donated in this time. All in all, more than 1,300. And all the works which were donated in this period were donated with the agreement of the artists, who said that they would bring their collections and works to Chile once democracy would reign there again. And I would like to show you a video in order to give you an idea of what happened in those years.
Y que está en la exposición este video, ¿no? ¿Sí?
You also see pictures from the exhibition of the time. This is a museum in exile, meaning that a dictatorship was established and artists and intellectuals had to go abroad in order to keep working. The story is, however, even more dramatic in the case of this museum. The idea was suggested by Salvador Allende. He wanted to found it in Santiago. It was to be called Museo de la Solidaridad. This could not happen because of the coup. However, works of art had been donated by artists from all over the world. These works were kept by the junta. No one knows where they are today. But people from Chile and Latin America, los exiliados, the exiles, organized resistance against the military dictatorship. They had the idea of establishing the museum abroad. And this is what we call it, a museum in exile. It will be a traveling museum, today in Nancy, tomorrow in Berlin, then on to Avignon. We'll try to bring it to as many places as possible. The museum includes works by Chilean artists. But international artists are present too. It's a beautiful and generous presence. Well-known artists dedicated works to the museum in order to accompany the cultural resistance of the Chilean people. What you can see in Nancy right now is but one part of it. There are many refugees. Many of them artists and intellectuals who are members of different cultural movements: Argentinians, Chileans, Uruguayans, Paraguayans, Brazilians, Bolivians. Just one example, there are more than 20,000 Uruguayans in Barcelona, all of them exiles, in one city alone. You may well imagine, allegedly, 80,000 Argentinians live in France. Well, possible. 5 or 6 years ago, they started a fascist campaign, manipulated from the inside and the outside. And you know the results. The Chilean drama is better known, but more and more citizens in France realize now what happens to my country, Argentina, where each day we see more violence, torture, and where intellectuals are murdered and journalists who oppose the regime disappear, and where terror and despair rule. As long as the Chilean people in exile keeps up its courage, its power, and its hope by building this museum and in numerous cultural political activities in Europe, there is hope, however.
Un peuple en exil, comme c'est le cas du peuple chilien, garde tout son courage, toute sa force et tout son espoir.
As long as there is courage, as long as there is hope,
Une grande quantité de manifestations culturelles et politiques qui se déroulent partout dans l'Europe, il y a de l'espoir.
life will go on. By building this museum and in numerous cultural and political activities in Europe, there is hope. I strongly believe that the fascist regimes in South America will fall. They will be destroyed by the people. And I don't mean the exiles, I mean the people who stayed, in conjunction with those who had to leave. Because I hope, and I'm convinced, that there will be international solidarity too.
Bueno, se crean comités locales en Colombia, Cuba, España, Finlandia.
In Colombia, Cuba, Finland, France, Panama,
Polonia y Suecia.
Mexico, Mexico and Switzerland. Local committees were founded. And of course, we know that lots of other activities went on. So we are not only investigating these local committees, but also other groups that supported. Here you see an example of John Rabascal. It's an artist from Catalonia, and you see the description of the work he donated and what happened to this work as far as we know. I would also like to show you pictures because the museum and the supporters also organized a number of political events and activities in order to stabilize the solidarity and in order to not lose the support of the artists and all those who wanted to give support in these political events. Here you see, for example, François Mitterrand in 1974 and a cultural event in Avignon also in 1974. We also tried to collect interviews with the artists who were involved and who could tell us more about the activities of the time. There were activities, for example, in the field of street arts, for example, in Venice, at the occasion of the biennial theater performances, music and murals. And Balmes, Mata, and other artists were invited to perform or to offer works of art. I'm showing you these pictures in order to give you an idea of all the activities that went on in this time. When the Central Committee was established, more exhibitions were organized, and then after 1991 also a number of exhibitions were mounted and sent to different countries. And in Paris, for example, there was a monastery where a number of works had been collected, or Carmen War, for example, was involved in the activities of trying and tracing the works that had not been sent to Chile before. She, by the way, became the first director of the Museo de la Solidaridad Salvador Allende, and she remained its director from 1991 to 2005. She used to be the coordinator of the Spanish Museum of Resistance, and one of the most important Latin American galleries in Spain. We also had works by Sulas Dorami, and she is an artist from Poland. Fostel had donated a work which had meant to be shown at the Documenta, for example. So you see a number of works which had been given to the Museum of Resistance. And of course, here to be seen in the work of Panto Rojo, a reference to the Vietnam War. And we also have a collection of Palestinian art in the MSSA. And that's all I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay. thanks so much, Rasha, Kristine, and Claudia, and Claude. It's late, and thanks for staying. We'll open the floor very, very soon. Just two questions packed in one to Rasha and Kristine that I thought would be just interesting to share in terms of the conception of the exhibition, and also maybe a little bit more of a question towards an open wound. So one of the questions of, like, how did you decide to deal with the relationship between document and artwork, and what could that have been if you had made other decisions also? And just to understand your thinking, to share your thinking around this, I think that's important in terms of kind of positioning the form that this show has taken on right now. And also what it would mean to present it elsewhere, for instance, from where you work right now, where you live and work. Maybe just as an entry.
Thank you. So just to begin with, some of the works were actually recovered. So not all the works from the 1978 exhibitions were destroyed. And some of the works were recovered and they were placed for safekeeping in the homes of families, some families in Beirut. And we had the opportunity to see them. So and actually, when we were preparing for this exhibition at the HKW, we debated with you a great deal about whether we should have any of the works. These we could have shipped. It is the 1978 story is an open wound, because actually artists donate work, and in the custody of the PLO, the works were lost. And you can imagine how much rumor, bad feeling, etc. surround this story still. We realized this very quickly, and we became fascinated, drawn into the research, and we sort of drifted away from the power of the works. There are official bodies looking for the works, looking to recover them. I don't know, I was more moved, I was very deeply moved when I saw the actual paintings, to see on their back, the international exhibition, on the back of the painting. I think essentially it should be recovered. It's the responsibility of the PLO to recover this collection, to show it, to share it. It should be a museum, free museum, like Dore Ashton was describing. But somehow, my natural disposition, and Kristine and I share this, we were more inclined to surfacing a history. In the surfacing of the history, we want to preserve the joy of people having access to artwork. There's a moment where a Palestinian writer, Liana Badr, describes that beautiful pleasure of just being able to go and stand in front of the Miro lithographs, and how much pleasure it gave her. And this is like a purely sensorial, emotional moment. So that's my answer to the artworks. In answer to the question, I mean, for us it's very important to take this documentary exhibition to Beirut, and not to show it in a museum in Beirut. And because it was at the Beirut Arab University. We can't go back to that same space, because now architecturally it's been transformed beyond recognition. So we're looking for the right venue, and it's very important for us to take it to Chile, to South Africa, to Cape Town, and I have to say, yeah, these are the most important places. Maybe Tokyo.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think taking it to cities where there was a story, there was a strong relationship. I mean, many cities, Berlin, there is a story, in fact, with the German artists that gave work to the exhibition. They were West German artists. But there was another story that comes out, which we had the chance to explore beyond just the 78 exhibition and those artists who gave work. In terms of yes, I think Beirut, obviously, I think the question of the works will come up there, and that's something that will be addressed in some way, whether through our exhibition or through a project or accompanying project, because it is the reality today. It's the elephant in the room. But I think showing the works, if there had been an opportunity or interest in showing the actual works, it may stop the project right there. Looking just at the works and the recovery of these objects sometimes just stops the story, as opposed to allowing us to tell the larger story behind the project. And in terms of documents and kind of the physicality of this exhibition, we want it to be an exhibition that's lightweight. It's something that could travel, inspired by the possibility of itinerant exhibitions. There are no actual original documents in vitrines in the exhibition. We have very few of those. And I think this is where the Musée Imaginaire and digital reproduction may allow us to share this material beyond, just this space, hopefully.
In both groups, we see that you are transforming research into exhibitions, and in the case of Claudia, you are also interrogating a very question of canon, how to negotiate historiography, which stories are being preserved or erased. Okay. En ambos grupos vimos cómo ustedes transforman una investigación en exhibiciones, y en tu caso también vemos una pregunta que es importante para la investigación que estamos haciendo, cuestionando el canon, cómo ciertas historias son conservadas y otras historias son borradas o negociadas, como es el caso del Museo de la Solidaridad.
Sí. Bueno, ese es el Museo de la Solidaridad. Es un museo que tiene una historia fascinante, que ha sido borrado con el tiempo y con la historia, primero por la dictadura, y el museo no es parte de la historia del arte ni latinoamericana. Está Ticio Escobar por ahí, me puede decir ¿sí? ¿No es cierto que no es parte de la historia latinoamericana? Ni tampoco parte de la historia internacional. Entonces, es fuerte que, y perdonen, encuentro muy bien el tema que están poniendo acá de los cánones y cómo la exposición de Palestina está siendo mostrada en la Casa de la Cultura del Mundo. Pero es fuerte tener que estar acá para también en Chile ser un proyecto, que tampoco es. Porque en Chile todavía está la polarización, Allende polariza. Entonces, la derecha todavía, que tiene el poder económico, encubre al museo, y hay niños que no pueden ir al museo porque es un museo que está hablando de Allende, que no está a la distancia. Y a pesar que han pasado 40 años, tampoco está a la distancia. Hoy día estábamos con Paz conversando, y acaba de salir, perdón, voy a ser como súper directa, pero acaba de salir una publicación de Mario Pedrosa en el MoMA, que vienen trabajando hace 20 años, hace 2 años, y en un minuto yo fui a Río, que estaban los editores ahí, y hablé con la gente porque supe que se estaba haciendo, y les mostré una cantidad de documentos del museo que no los conocían, y estaban ellos construyendo la historia de Pedrosa, uno de los grandes críticos actuales de arte latinoamericano. Y sacaron el libro y les pasé aparte un texto que yo le había comisionado a Dora Ashton, que apareció publicado hace un mes, ya fue lanzado en el MoMA. Y para mi sorpresa empiezo a revisar el libro y me encuentro alrededor con 8 archivos, de 10 en total que habían, que eran del museo y que no estaban mencionados. Entonces, ahí estamos hablando de canon. Cuando el MoMA, y hoy día me llega cuando estaba con Paz un mail pidiendo disculpas, perdón que no les pusimos los créditos en el libro. Pero es que las cosas no son, el MoMA son profesionales. Si ustedes le hubieran prestado el texto o los archivos, te aseguro que los ponen. El Museo de la Solidaridad pasó los archivos y les preguntamos, ¿quieren que pongamos los archivos? Van a poner, no los queremos para no pagar derechos. Pero los transcribieron y los pusieron y no pusieron los créditos. Entonces, ahí estamos hablando de cánones. No sé.
We would like to invite the public also to pose some questions. Our microphones around. You're welcome.
something? Yes. Have to talk not about me only, but about many artists. People are very excited when they have an idea to organize a show, a solidarity show. But sometimes they don't think about the feeling of the artist. When you are an artist, many times you have phone call asking painting. If they come, they choose a painting. It's never enough large, so they go with large painting, and then have no news about this painting. And I don't only complain, but I want to talk about all the artists have give paintings from different museums and never have a feedback about what happened about their paintings. So this I want to provide of the situation. I'm here to talk with you about this feeling. You have to consider the artist when you borrow a painting, they give you a painting, please give them back news about what you do. Thank you.
Claude, yo voy a tomar la palabra institucional. En nuestro caso, el museo, estamos, y te lo vamos a hacer llegar ahora en julio, lanzando el catálogo razonado de resistencia. Recuperamos los archivos hace 3 años, no es como una excusa, son 1.200 obras que fueron donadas y que no nos ha dado el tiempo de poder investigar. Y me pasa que nos vamos encontrando con artistas, ahora como les contaba vengo llegando de México, de hacer estos casos de investigación directamente por los envíos de país, y reunimos a los artistas que estaban. Y se nos va alimentando la historia del museo, pero ha sido un desfase de tiempo con el museo que llevamos 40 años de retardo respecto a la investigación. Y pedirte las disculpas, y aquí te agradezco, y en representación de todos los artistas, te agradezco a ti. Gracias.
So, it's just really because it's so late. But if there are no questions right now, I'd say we're like I'd release everybody. Thanks a lot. We'll be a bit around for a few more minutes, and I hope many of you will find their way back tomorrow at noon. It's going to be a long day, so.